My name is Simon, and Simon Ryder Burbridge, and I am also with the Ecology Action Centre. We're based in Halifax, Chibouctouc, Nova Scotia, and Mi'kma'ki, and we are one of Atlantic Canada's oldest and largest environmental nonprofits. We've been around since 1971. Nicholas will be talking about our coastal programming, and then I'm with our marine team, and so we kind of like ebb and flow in how closely our coastal and marine programs work.
Thank you for the excellent introduction, Simon, and thank you for having me. The video I shared is of the 100 Wild Islands in Nova Scotia, and it is really an expression of the beauty of our coastline and what the possibilities are if we conserve and protect the vibrant coast that we have, and it is really what drives us. As Simon said, my name is Nicholas Winkler. I'm the Coastal Adaptation Coordinator at the Ecology Action Centre. And I would also like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, where we are surrounded by thousands of kilometers of coastline that sustain and nourish us, but also to acknowledge these histories and legacies of African Nova Scotians who have also been displaced from marginalized coastal spaces. The complex conservation challenges, barriers, and coastal issues that we face on our coast today are a direct consequence of that colonization. And that's important to remember in our work going forward. And I won't spend too much talking about the Ecology Action Centre because Simon did such a great job of introducing us. But suffice to say that I work alongside Simon and our wilderness team on issues that are relevant to coastal sustainability, as well with another organization called East Coast Environmental Law, who have been really instrumental in advocating not just coastal but other environmental policies in both Nova Scotia and the region, as well as the Coastal Coalition of Nova Scotia, which is important to this story today. And it's a sort of an informal group that I currently chair in my position at the Ecology Action Centre. The complexity of coastal systems is really what makes them, difficult and challenging to manage and protect. Often they are seen as either terrestrial systems or marine systems, but rarely are they treated together. We face issues of unregulated development, coastal infilling, habitat degradation, and the impacts of climate change on our coast today. And coasts are really important because they are these transitional spaces between both marine and terrestrial habitats, but also they provide tremendous space for biodiversity conservation. And Nova Scotia alone, just a number of the habitats, as Simon pointed out, are eelgrass beds, kelp habitats, salt marshes and coastal wetlands, sand dunes and forest barrens that are host to migratory and critical and endangered species. In Nova Scotia, we have a fairly unique situation in that 87% of the coast is owned by less than 6% of the population. And that results in a really poor coastal access regime. So very, very sort of problematic opportunities for people to successfully access the coast at a large scale, but also creates these power dynamics that are not favorable to create coastal protection legislation, which we'll talk about today. And recently, there's a number that our provincial government has been using in the last couple of years, claiming that it has protected 13% of the coast. And we're not quite sure how they've arrived at that number. And the reason that it really bothers us is it happens to be the exact proportion of the coast that is not privately owned. And that is maybe symptomatic of some of the problems we face politically when it comes to coastal protection. To set the scene for the challenges that we face, it's important to talk a little bit about the history of coastal protection in Nova Scotia. And the lines, the text that you see crossed out here are failed attempts at getting there. And there have been a number of attempts over the years to undertake some sort of form of coastal management or protection where we repeatedly failed to do so. And it's important to note, I'm only going back to 2004. There's been other attempts prior to that. The Coastal Protection Act, which failed in 2024, represented the most advanced effort to manage and protect our coastlines. But it was abandoned by the current government, even though when they were in opposition, along with all the other parties, had actually supported the passage of the act in 2019. As a matter of legal quirk, the act was passed, but it was never proclaimed into law, pending the creation of regulations, which we understand were all but written up, but no one has ever seen. To replace the Coastal Protection Act, what came along was the Coastal Protection Action Plan, a limited sort of 3-year non-enforceable policy that offloads all the responsibility of coastal protection and management to Nova Scotia's more than 50 municipalities, as well as individual coastal property owners. And that really sets the landscape for really problematic coastal management, because we understand and we know that a number of municipalities just do not have the capacity to undertake this work. In fact, if you look back historically, the reason that we went towards a Coastal Protection Act was because municipalities said they didn't have the capacity to do that. So we've come full circle. And part of this important story is the Coastal Coalition that was formed in 2004. It's a loose association of organizations and individuals, and they were instrumental in moving the needle forward 20 years ago. And when things started rolling and were in motion, they sort of dissolved or were dormant. And they reemerged in 2004, amongst the widespread condemnation of the government's decision to walk away from the CPA. But came back in a new and different form, and we need to sort of, one of the objectives we'd like to do is maybe build some capacity there. And it's really important to note that we're almost 2 years into a 3-year plan, and we have not seen a single new municipal coastal protection bylaw come into force in the last 2 years. In failing to proclaim the Coastal Protection Act, what has effectively happened, we have perpetuated the problem that a coast is everyone's problem, but no one's responsibility. And it's a narrative that has stood for a long time and one that has only become worse. The headlines that you see on the screen on the slide before you are just 3 of many headlines from this year alone. And another thing that we're facing are really strong political headwinds in this year, especially in the environmental movement. Just to use one simple coastal example, a golf course developer had proposed to had proposed a golf course on the island of Cape Breton, and they were intending to encroach on an established provincial park at West Mabou. And this is not the first time that this had been proposed, and it's not the first time that citizens got together and opposed this action. And once again, community groups came together in force, and I think the government saw the light and decided not to permit this new proposal. But at the same time, the leadership of the government did not commit to protecting provincial parks altogether. They left the door open for future proposals, and this is problematic because it isn't the first time we have dealt with coastal or provincial parks that have come under threat from private development. So we are, in addition to not having Coastal Protection Act, we're seeing some rather egregious encroachment on already protected spaces. Next, I will discuss our project that we've been developing under the Peregrine Accelerator. And our project is Coast Check. It's called Coast Check, and its guiding vision is to build a renewed, shared, and sustainable relationship between people and the coast that prioritizes coastal ecosystems as well as human communities. I want to briefly acknowledge the real value of the Peregrine Accelerator program. and how important it has been in the development of our project. We came initially to the Peregrine Accelerator with an idea to map the ongoing extent of human development on the coast and how it was degrading coastal ecosystems, especially because a lot of that change takes place in places we don't know or hear about after the fact. And we had hoped to use that body of evidence to sort of show the failure of the CPA, of not having a CPA. But there were a number of, I think, deep problems with that approach, not least how you roll something like that at scale and in time, and without spending too much time on the things that didn't work. But one of the underlying assumptions that we have had in our theory of change is that more evidence would lead to change. And I think, that was a flawed assumption. And I think that is borne in part by the extensive media coverage calling our provincial government to task on not dealing with coastal issues and coastal community issues. In fact, for the last 2 years, we've heard one repeated press release over and over again, despite the overwhelming evidence that there needs to be action. So we realized through this through the Peregrine process that we needed to take a different approach. And because the scale of our project's ambition had always been at some point to take this idea at a provincial scale, to really sort of build a movement to demand coastal protection legislation at a provincial scale. And the reason that's important is because that is the sort of predominant and accepted way to manage large spaces like coastlines at a state or provincial level, not at municipal unit level. And the reason we wanted to do a pilot was effectively, we would need to build internal capacity to take that on, but we needed to test assumptions and demonstrate feasibility in the ideas that we had, and as well as give us an opportunity to build relationships with coastal communities with intent and meaning, especially if we were going to broaden our scale. So on this slide is I know it does not seem so, it's a simplified version, an updated version of our theory of change for coast check, and I'd like to walk you through it briefly. It makes a key assumption that I think respects people in coastal spaces in the sense that they know that coastal change is happening, and then they know that there are impacts happening. And if we begin on the left-hand side of the sort of thought process, is I think one of the challenges we have found, at least anecdotally, is that there is some hesitation in the understanding of what coastal protection legislation would do. So what we are proposing through a series of community engagement sessions is to really maybe connect people's knowledge of their coastal spaces at a community level with sort of demonstrating why it is important to have good protection for our coast. And effectively, we are facing a binary choice that by not having coastal protection, we are allowing nature and sort of unregulated development to threaten these ways of life and coastal communities. And if we are correct in that assumption that we make those connections, we are assuming that people will be more inclined to take action to demand coastal protection legislation. And in that sense, we would have two objectives we're trying to fulfill initially, is to have people contact their political representatives to demand effectively that coastal legislation at a provincial scale, but also to make sure that those representative units that are engaged with by community members are done so at a geographic spread across the province to showcase that isn't just coming maybe from one area per se or important to one group of people. And from there, we have a cascading series of assumptions that effectively feeds, if they hold true, that feeds this sort of desire from coastal communities to see coastal protection as a priority up to cabinet level, and then effectively result in provincial coastal legislation enacted, and ultimately the protection of coastal ecosystems. It builds in, not shown here in the diagram, a number of other assumptions that would also allow us to build trust in community, improve the capacity through training or resources for individuals to take action if they were convinced to do so, but also to improve coastal literacy in the sense that it might give community members a better ability to articulate the coastal issues that they witness, or may or may not have explanations for, as well as building capacity within the Coastal Coalition network, which would be key to sort of scaling up CoastCheck at a larger scale post-pilot. The overall vision, if we were successful in sort of taking CoastCheck from a pilot to a larger project, would be that by 2030 we would have built a transformative grassroots network and movement for coastal protection that would be necessary to sustain a long-term coastal protection narrative, and have seen the implementation of the Coastal Protection Act, or alternatively a renewed political commitment for coastal protection legislation within a specific timeframe. Experience and evidence tells us that progress can be glacial, when we know that from history, and it can be nonlinear. And we also recognize that there are probably opportunities to improve on what the Coastal Protection Act is. So is there a future version of CPA 2.0, for example? I think it is really important to think about the scale that, in terms of time, that we're thinking about. In some sense, Nova Scotia is maybe a third or halfway through a process that other jurisdictions have gone under, that it might have taken them 40 to 60 years to undertake. California and the UK are maybe some classic examples. Although by different means, they have all relied on large scale, sustained public support. So for us in CoastCheck, but also in broader coastal protection narrative, coastal legislation isn't the sort of the terminal end goal. I think it's a key milestone and a necessary one, but any legislation will require an ongoing sort of grassroots support from communities and civil society in order to be successful. And some examples of that are the California Coastal Commission, which again took decades of people supporting a demand for legislation to protect California's coast. And California has a really unique model in that sense that's unique anywhere in the world. You look at coastal access in Rhode Island, which is enshrined in its state's constitution. So the right to get to the coast is an inherent sort of enshrined right. And yet community groups have to fight tooth and nail on a regular basis to make sure these rights are not eroded. You might wonder why I'm picking examples outside of Canada as well, because in Nova Scotia, we've been the first to do the Coastal Protection Act, and we think PI might be next in line, but there is clearly a need for broad-scale, long-term public support in order to make that happen. So bearing in mind these large timescales, but also where we are at in Nova Scotia in terms of the decades that have been spent on these efforts, but also recognizing that the Coastal Protection Act is quite mature in the sense that we have fully developed legislation that has, if you bear in mind that a lot of work has been done on developing the legal framework that led to the CPA, but also all the community consultations, all the background research. So we're not starting from a blank slate. We're effectively trying to either get this thing over the finish line or get an improved version of it, but also recognizing that in the long term, in order for the Coastal Protection Act or any coastal regulation to be successful would require continued civil society engagement. So at the sort of a grand scale, a sort of larger vision for CoastCheck, we envision a pilot project that would take 18 months and engage communities across 30 engagement sessions across Nova Scotia, in which we would validate our theory of change and our assumptions, but also particularly our messaging, because different parts of the coast have both different social and physical geographies that require maybe different messaging or a different understanding of why it is important to have coastal protection legislation to conserve not both coastal spaces, coastal habitats, biodiversity, but also the livelihoods and the coastal ways of life that depend on nature. And those ways of life that we cherish so much. In fact, Nova Scotia's license plate slogan is Canada's Ocean Playground, right? But right now we're really headed in a space of unregulated development and chipping away the coast, death by 1,000 cuts. And then once we have the ability to build capacity in the coalition in order to leverage that network in the future, but also to test those assumptions, we would create a toolkit for community partners, and we would envision leveraging the community partners within the coalition to effectively deploy CoastCheck at a provincial scale post-pilot and where DAC would assume a supportive role to support financing, to support coordination, but also evaluation and effectively foster that process, which dovetails nicely with DAC's previous experience of incubating projects and letting them grow beyond our organization. In sort of very simple terms, we see CoastCheck rolling across 5 phases. So an initial 3-month project development and initiation phase where we onboard staff, initiate conversations with our project partners, and then test across a number of these community sessions our messaging, and assess and adapt the effectiveness of what we're doing over sort of the bulk of the pilot, and then proceed by assimilating that into sort of the toolkit that would then go for the post pilot phase of CoastCheck. And also plan and spend some time planning and designing and sort of figuring out how we would bring this at a larger scale. In order to do that, we're seeking an investment of 200,000 Canadian dollars to support staffing capacity, 2 full-time positions, and resources to actually host the community engagements, as well as the capacity building component of the CoastCheck pilot. Currently, we're not funded, as is evident by a presentation. I think you realize that this idea is new. We are supported by some resources through the Peregrine Accelerator, and we have some other resources that we could depend on, but by and large, CoastCheck is not funded. And I want to finish off by just situating CoastCheck within the Ecology Action Centre. One of the things the Ecology Action Centre as an organization has tremendous experience with, other than having been a watchdog for the CPA in the last couple of years, it is as a convener of organization, a mobilizer of people, and an incubator and sort of ideas and to bring those to light. And I think Simon can talk a little bit about some of those. But it also dovetails nicely with the other work that the DAC does to support biodiversity and habitat conservation, whether it's protected areas or wetlands on our wilderness team, or some of the work that Simon had alluded to earlier in terms of eelgrass restoration, the community marine planning, and nature-based solution, and really sort of aligns really well with our vision for an ecologically resilient world where both nature and communities thrive. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to my talk. I know it's the end of the day, and you're probably all tired. Thank you very much to the Peregrine Accelerator team for the invaluable support throughout this process, as well as the fellow cohort members for all the ideas and support you have shared on this journey. And I am really regret that I cannot be there with you in person. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. And thanks, Simon, too. That was really good overview of the AC and good filibustering.
Thank you.
I was wondering, so with the municipal context as it is, like, I guess my question has 2 parts. Like, one, does the AC feel that municipalities feel as though this was just kind of pushed onto them like so many things are these days? And if that is the sentiment that they feel, could they also be a target audience for these engagement sessions, for them to act as, a push to provincial folks as well, as part of that theory change? Like, I know there was the major focus on, engaging Nova Scotians and getting Nova Scotians to talk to their political representatives, but yeah, could there also be a municipal push as part of that, or has that been part of the vision?
I think that's a great question. I think to answer the first part of your question, yes, absolutely. I think this came to a surprise to pretty much everyone, both the general public, the environmental movement, but as well as municipalities who were sort of, one day woke up picking up the tab for coastal protection across the province. Yes, I think there is a role to create, to potentially drive some of that support, and there may be, you can sort of game a couple of options here, and with the risk of getting to the weeds. I think one of the things we are doing in another part of our work in terms of the advocacy is trying to support municipalities who are willing to do coastal protection, because there's another pathway to this, although it's a very long and sort of maybe difficult road, is do you get enough municipalities on board doing some form of coastal protection? And then you have an argument at a provincial level at some points like, well, 80% of them have done it, we might as well go ahead and do the whole thing. But the risk is that you piecemeal this along the entire way. And right now, what we're finding from our conversations is that municipalities a lot of them don't have the capacity, some of them straight up no desire to do it. I mean, some municipalities are very rural. People are there as volunteer council members. Others are just trying to figure out how to do recycling, right? So coastal protection kind of falls fairly low down on the list. And the other risk is, what we're also anticipating is that you'll move from one jurisdiction to the next at a municipal level, and you'll end up with a bunch of different rules that don't align. So that is a potential pathway, but it seems like the harder road, considering that the Coastal Protection Act is a piece of legislation. Even if the government were to remove it off the books, it can be reintroduced, or it can be sort of added to. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh yeah, no, thanks. That's awesome.
Nick, hey, it's Phil Huffman. Great to see you, even though you can't see me, I think. But I guess thanks for the update and just laying out the way the project's evolved. Interesting to hear, challenging situation. And I guess one question I have is just thinking about the community engagement sessions that you're looking to include in the pilot phase. That seems like a really critical step. And I'm wondering, are you going to be working with sort of community leaders, opinion leaders at the local level in the municipalities to help sort of co-host those and to help build community engagement and enthusiasm and receptivity to some of the ideas that you're going to be putting forward? Thanks.
Phil, thank you, and it's great to hear your voice, even if I can't see you. Yeah, I think that is a great question. There's a couple of points to that. One is, I think our starting point is in part the organizations that are part of the Coastal Coalition, even the ones that are no longer active in the Coastal Coalition. The list of people who are still listed as part of it but don't actually show up to the meetings, who were really instrumental in the early 2000s and fostering this work and sort of really laying the groundwork for the Coastal Protection Act. They're still around. They're very much still interested in coastal protection. So they are, in some regards, our first point of contact in community, because they work at a sort of hyper-local scale for the most part. And yes, we also have individuals and members within the coalition, but also outside the coalition, who are, if you will, like sort of either influential or thought leaders in their communities. And I think one of the things that as an organization and as a team with a very small capacity we've grappled with is also engaging Indigenous communities and African Nova Scotian communities. And I think one of the things maybe I should have articulated better is having an improved capacity to undertake a project like this will be an opportunity to start building those relationships. So those are probably some of the points that we would sort of work with.
Just going to add, Nick, that the Coastal Coalition that Nick has been helping to coordinate for the past year or so is kind of the who's who of people who want to do coastal protection in the province. So it kind of makes EAC like a bit of a natural fit to do some of this broader engagement work. Building towards like the municipal strategy piece, like in the interim to Adam's question too, like is really important here. And those conversations like always emerge on their own. Like at those sessions, there are people who want to do stuff. Like you want to maintain your rage, but also be able to do something, like kind of similar to what you guys are working on at the community scale, right? So it's both of those things hopefully happening at once. Yeah, and then the longer term vision for the coast coming together as well.
Hi, I'm Ellie Oldock. I work with First Light in Maine, and I just want to highlight the possibility in working with private landholders when policy is not pointing the direction you want it to. We've had a lot that's become possible through working with private conservation to return land to Wabanaki people. So in some ways it's like let the policy catch up with the people, and I really appreciate the grassroots approach. I also kind of feel like a lot about today has been hearing groups finding ways to work around dams and barriers and obstacles. So I see that in this presentation, really in all the presentations, including non-metaphorical dams with the eel team. And also just really highlighting, like it kind of blew my mind when you said it took 40 to 60 years to bring about the public policy shift. And that made me think a lot about the long nature of all of this work. And it made me start wondering, like in all of this community outreach, if you could speak at all about like working with the younger generation of conservationists or land protectors or like kids that maybe don't even hold that identity yet. But what does working with the next generation look like in a long-term project like this? Thanks.
Thank you, Ellie. Great question. And so I think you just sparked a lot of thoughts in me. I'd love to touch on a couple of those. Working with private landowners, we do have I think, a list, if you will, of coastal landowners who are pro-coastal protection. So we do engage that constituency. In fact, because of Nova Scotia's such high percentage of private coastal ownership, they are probably a very significant portion of that constituency, but they're also, in some regards, the skeptical part of that constituency, because when the Coastal Protection Act comes along and starts regulating development on the coast, people have questions about the value of their properties or what they can and can't do with property on the coast. So they're an important constituency, whether they're skeptics or pro-CPA. In terms of the next generation, I think that is certainly a challenge that we face. I suspect it's the same for the coalitions that Simon works with. They tend to be of an older age generation, partly because they have, I think, maybe more time on their hands or more resources to be active in these processes. There is, I think, a very small group of students Protect the Coast, I believe it's called, in Nova Scotia. So there is certainly a recognized desire amongst younger generations to protect the coast, but I think it is certainly a gap that we need to meet. Yeah, I don't have a much better answer than that, unfortunately.
I would add also just like some of the conversation earlier on today about like for the Wabanaki salt marsh restoration work, like something that really stuck with me and that would apply here for sure is like the restoration of the coast taking place in tandem with access. Like we do have a fundamental access problem, and that is maybe the number one like way that, you know, you could engage youth in doing some of this coastal protection work, because they love going to these places, and you know, we love going to these places too. So that's really helpful. And then yeah, it's to Nick's point, like, yeah, we do work with a lot of like people who are, they ask me a lot in some of these coalitions, like, how do we get the young people here? And I'm like, well, it is 2 p.m. on a weekday, so that would be one thing. One thing that we could try is a different time. But also we do have a number of spaces at the EAC where we do facilitate like youth engagement. In particular, one of the big ones we've been like helping to like supporting their organization of the school strikes now for like several years, which has been really great. And then you get people coming into the office who are like interested in learning about all these other things that, you know, the climate activism brings them in. And that has been like very, very fruitful and also like a lot of fun. And there are like a lot of costumes and stuff like that. So it's really like rewarding to do that work.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much.